I mean, you made it all the way out here in this weather, so good evening. Stay a while, get cozy. Welcome to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where every month is Black History Month, and Black history is certainly for everyone. My name is Novella Ford, and I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs and Exhibitions. And I want to thank you for joining us in person, as well as those who are watching online, for tonight's talks at the Schomburg, Reparations, Resistance, and Radical Imagination, Queen Mother Moore, featuring Dr. Ashley D. Farmer, who's the author of Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore, who will be in conversation with Dr. Brandi T. Summers, who's an Associate Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Columbia University. There will be a book signing following the program. For those who know, who already did, you probably already purchased your books before the program. But if you have not purchased books yet, we will have the bookstore open afterwards. And books are available in the Schomburg shop, which is the shop right past the security desk in the front. And those watching online, you can purchase the book online at schomburgshop.com. For 100 years, with its origins at the original 135th Street Library, the Schomburg has been the intellectual heart of Harlem, and we thank you for contributing to the communities that affirm our work every day. I am grateful that we continue to convene communities of scholars and artists, performers and educators to discuss and preserve Black culture and illuminate the relevancy of the past to our future. We are celebrating the Schomburg's 100th anniversary all year long, and so I hope you will join us again and again and again. Can we give it up for 100 years? No, I think it's such an incredible feat that the Schomburg Center has basically been in this plot of land for 100 years, from the 135th Street Library to this building now, to be able to see a community change and change along with it, or evolve, I should say, and evolve along with it. And so I'm just so grateful that you all decide to come out day after day for our programming. As we bring this year to a close, we have 2 more events. Tomorrow, jazz trumpeter Dave Guy will perform as part of our Carnegie Hall citywide event. And as most people know, even though we open registration and it may say sold out, hundreds of people sign up, hundreds of other people show up. And so there's always a standby line. And so if you have your heart set on coming to tomorrow's program, but you're seeing that it's sold out, we always have a standby line and welcome people into the space as long as we have room available. Also, next Tuesday, closing out our programming in the afternoon, we have an intimate live piano performance by Cuban-born pianist and composer Camila Cortina Bello. And that will take place in our Latimer Gallery. And it offers an afternoon of deep listening as well as viewing of the 1937 Aaron Douglas murals, Aspects of a Negro Life. Those murals will be up through the end of February, and then they will go back down into the JBH Research and Reference Library. So I highly recommend, if you haven't been able to look at those paintings close up, where they're usually high up and you have to look up at them, this is now a great time while they're still on view at eye level to take some time and really take in what he was thinking about and how he was viewing Black life, both from slavery till now, or till 1937. We will also celebrate the piano virtuoso Mary Lou Williams with a screening of an archival interview from the Moving Image and Recorded Sound Division. I invite you to learn more about our upcoming programs by visiting our website at schomburg.org/100. So I'm going to ask you to please take this time to silence your cell phones and invite a friend to watch online at youtube.com/the Schomburg Center. That's youtube.com/the Schomburg Center. Most of our programs this year are directly inspired by an item or an idea found in our Centennial Exhibition 100, a century of collections, community, and creativity found throughout the Schomburg Center. Featured in the front gallery are 2 images of Queen Mother Moore taken by the late Black Power movement era photographer Kwame Brathwaite. Dr. Farmer brings us what has been described as a groundbreaking portrait of one of the most influential yet overlooked figures in the 20th century Black freedom movements. Dr. Ashley D. Frommer is an award-winning writer, researcher, and cultural analyst who explores Black history and its implications today. She is the author of Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore. And her first insights have appeared in numerous venues, including Harper's Bazaar, NPR, this is what happens when I am not using my glasses because it's annoying. Farmer's ideas and insights have appeared in numerous venues, including Harper's Bazaar, NPR, The Washington Post, and Teen Vogue. Farmer is an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Brandi Summers, who she will be in conversation with, as I mentioned, is Associate Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies and Director of the Graduate Studies at Columbia University. Prior to joining the faculty at Columbia in 2024, Dr. Summers was the Associate Professor of Geography at UC Berkeley. Her research examines the relationship between the function of race, space, urban infrastructure, and architecture. Her first book, Black in Place, The Spatial Aesthetics of Race in a Post-Chocolate City, from UNC Press 2019, explores how competing notions of Blackness organize efforts to structure economic relations and develop land in gentrifying Washington, D.C. Her second book, which is forthcoming, is Oakland Echoes, Reimagining and Reclaiming the Black City. Dr. Summers is a contributing writer to Places Journal and has published several articles and essays that analyze the relationship between race, power, aesthetics, and urbanization that appear in both scholarly and popular publications, including the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and Antiquity. So with that said, please welcome Dr. Ashley Farmer and Dr. Brandi Summers to the stage to discuss the incredible Queen Mother Moore. Give them a round of applause.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out in the rain. I know it's not a huge deal for New Yorkers to come out in the rain, but I'm a Californian and we don't do rain, so it's
And
nice.
I'm from Texas, so.
Very happy to see you all, and hopefully you've already gone to the bookstore to get this book. Do not be intimidated by the size. I'm telling you, it's a really beautiful and easy read. You get caught up in the story, so I'm really happy to be here with you, Dr. Farmer. So we're going to chat for a while, and then we're going to have some time for you to ask questions, so I look forward to that period as well. All right, so I told you downstairs that I tend to over-prepare. I have lots of notes, but I'm not going to ask them all. I'm first going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your inspiration for writing this book.
Yeah, so I'm a historian of radical Black women, and I wrote another book called Remaking Black Power, and in that book, I interviewed probably 30, 40 different men and women activists talking about their role in the Panther Party and the US organization, you name it. And almost every single one of those people mentioned something about Queen Mother Moore, right? She was the first person that they had ever heard about reparations from. She was the first person that they had learned about Marcus Garvey from in the Back to Africa movement. They talked about how she could stand on the street corner even well into old age and just conjure up the cadence of Garvey in a way and a likes they never seen before. And when I went to just start to research about her, I was like, there was nothing almost, you know, a handful of blog posts, maybe some remembrances of other folks that had known her. So the activist community was definitely keeping her alive, but the scholarly community was not. So as I was writing the other book, you know, anytime I would find anything about her or meet anybody who knew her, I would just, you know, talk to them, take a note, kind of put stuff away in a little folder. And slowly but surely over time, I felt like I got to a place where I could perhaps try to do her life justice. But I mean, you know, she lived from 1898 to 1997.
Incredible.
Right? I mean, so her history is not just a story about her thoughts and political philosophy, which I'm sure we'll get into, but it's also just a history of the 20th century Black freedom movement, right? As told by a Black woman living and working on it every day. So I was stunned that somebody who was held in such high regard in the activist community had not received kind of their due, and so it was really a labor of love to do that.
And that really does show in how you write the book, that love that you have, and also interest. And it's important that we're here at the Schomburg, especially being in Harlem, because she ended up becoming an adopted daughter of Harlem. And though she came from Louisiana and was in New Orleans, and that's where she was able to interact with a lot of these political figures, it's still very important that she came here and, like you said, introduced really a lot of people, especially changing the way we might understand Black nationalism, the way we understand or came to know Black reparations. So I'm curious about the method you used. And so you just talked about how you were essentially gathering an archive over time, right? You were getting all of these pieces, ephemera. And so can you tell us about some of the language used in terms of this could have happened, or this should have happened, or she could have met this person at this location, the kind of speculative history you were building?
Yeah, so even though she was around for the majority of the 20th century, we don't have a great kind of archive in the sense of like, there's not a place that you can open up and look at box 1, folder 1, see her birth certificate, and go all the way to her death. In fact, this picture that is on the cover is a picture from her apartment here in Harlem in her later years. And most people don't even know where most of the stuff in this picture is. She does have one son who has, say, like this lovely photo of her sister Eloise, who, you know, we can certainly talk about later. But by and large, most of it has been kind of scattered or spread. So I think that was a lot of why a lot of people hadn't written about her. There wasn't a way to kind of find this critical mass here. So some of it is that was just simply not true. People just didn't know where to look for it, right? There is always evidence of Black women organizing and thinking, and probably nowhere more so than here, right?
That's right.
Upstairs in the archive. Like, just to give you a really great example of a find that I love to talk about is she was involved in the school, community control school struggles in the 1960s with people taking over their schools in Harlem, in Brooklyn, and right? And if you go upstairs and look in the books and in the archives of that, you don't see anything necessarily labeled Queen Mother Moore. But there's a folder up there that just says Boycott 1966. I happened to open it, and it's a poem that she wrote. She was a poet, not a great poet, but I include a lot of the poetry in the book. But it's a poem that she wrote while she's there overnight, you know, in the Brooklyn Board of Education, you know, organizing, right? So some of this strategy is a bit like, if you go with me for a second, I'm gonna take you on a space metaphor.
Okay.
Yeah, buckle up. You know, so we think about black holes, right? You know, you can't ever see a black hole, but you know that it exists because it's refracting, right? And light and other things, right? Nothing escapes it, but you know it exists because what's around it. That is an example of having to kind of constantly search in areas that she's around, right?
Oh, wow.
Her herself might be a black hole archivally, but you know if you search around where she is, you can find her. So there's that. But there's also just the reality that some of it has been gone, particularly her early girlhood in New Orleans, right? We didn't keep great records of Black folks in general, and then certainly not Black women in the same way. So there you have to kind of world build and imagine what she could have been going through, what she navigated as a young girl at the turn of the century and not. And one of the things that's really interesting about Queen Mother Moore is she's an unlikely Black nationalist in some ways. She was born to relative privilege. She calls herself a bourgeois little stinker. That's her term, not mine, but it's in the book. And you know, she was among the Creole class in New Orleans. Her father owned land. Her father owned houses. Her mother did not have to work. So it really was a very charmed kind of girlhood until she was orphaned. And then she went from this life of having maids and having nannies to being a maid and a nanny for white folks in white women's households. So because of that as well, we don't have quite the same level of archival work. And then finally, she had a third grade education because she had to drop out of school to care for her sisters. And she was somebody who I like to say was kind of thinking in motion. She was on the go. So she wasn't always writing these treatises, right? She was writing those poems, she was making a pamphlet, she was giving a speech, but we don't have as much of a written record, say, as we do from like a Du Bois, right, or somebody else. So we have to become more inventive about how we talk about these women in some ways as well.
I love that you brought up how she grew up and the fact that she was privileged when she grew up in New Orleans. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit more about like her consciousness and how her political consciousness.
Yeah.
Usually we hear about various figures who became who they were because of their upbringing and because they were inspired in particular ways. So can you talk a little bit more about her consciousness over time? Even?
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting. She's kind of getting these mixed messages early on, right? Her father comes out of slavery in New Iberia, New Orleans. He takes advantage of what radical Reconstruction has to offer him. He becomes voting. He becomes a constable in New Iberia. And he defends himself sometimes with weapons. So she sees this moment of self-defense and pride in being a black man. But by that same token, because she's part of this Creole class, she's also being taught class-wise to look down upon black people somewhat, right? And to think that there are those among her that are lesser than. So it's this interesting kind of dichotomy that she has. But everything changes, like I said, after she's orphaned, and she quickly slides down the class ladder, and then she meets Marcus Garvey for the first time. I don't know, should I tell that story?
Yes.
Okay. I think many of you in the audience probably know this story very much as well. But, you know, it's the early 1920s in New Orleans, and Audley Moore is basically working day in and day out as a domestic worker. And she is married to her first husband, who is a Jamaican man that introduces her to Marcus Garvey. And Marcus Garvey is slated to speak at the Longshoremen's Club in New Orleans. And, you know, I want you to imagine kind of a two-story building in that quintessential New Orleans, like shutters, you know, kind of fashion. It's the place where the dock workers organize, but it's also just a community hub and home. And as she's walking in, she's kind of walking slow because she says she's got a 45 in her bra. She's got another one in her pocketbook, and she says her husband is carrying a suitcase of bullets, yeah? And so she's like trudging through the heat of July in New Orleans, and as she's walking in, everybody has these murmurs like, is he coming to speak, is he coming to speak? Because the night before, he was slated to speak to nearly 4,000 different black folks in New Orleans, but the white New Orleanians, obviously afraid of his rousing black people to action, tried to arrest him and bar him from coming. His organization, the UNIA, gets him out, and you know they're ready to see what he's going to do. So as she tells it, everybody's kind of sitting in the hall, and you know everybody's a little nervous. Everybody's got their guns, and then the police come and basically line up one per row, right? So they're watching the black folks, right? They're watching the police, and then all of a sudden Marcus Garvey comes bounding in and apologizes for not being able to speak. As she tells it, everybody's guns go up, right? And the police's guns go up, and the police threaten to arrest Marcus Garvey again, but all the folks in unison yell, "Speak, Garvey, speak." And she does the finger guns. I gotta do the finger guns, right? Speak, Garvey, speak, right? And she says that they put their guns away and they leave, right? And she sits down and hears a moment and a speech that transforms her life, right? So, you know, we can talk about the veracity of all of that, but he did come. The white folks did try to arrest him. They did file in there. They did leave, and he did speak. But for, you know, an early 20th century young black woman who has found herself basically in the drugs of society, she has watched black folks defend themselves with guns and win. And then she sat down and listened to a person tell her that she shouldn't be ashamed of her hair or her skin, that there's black people all over the world that are organizing together, that the problems black people are facing in the Carolinas and in Cuba and in Canada and in Cape Town are all the same. And it's an aha moment for her, where she really realizes not only about the black diaspora, but also really buys into Garvey's idea of Africa for the Africans and black nationalism.
That's right. No, that's wonderful. I'm glad you brought up also this black internationalism. I think it's important and goes on. I'm going to get to a question about that a little bit later. But I did, you know, you bringing up the fact that, you know, her father was born into slavery, that Reconstruction really changed the dimensions of their family unit and abilities for them to live in particular ways. So oftentimes when we think about a black radical tradition, we think about it in terms of periods. We think of them as separate and sometimes overlapping, but not necessarily so. But Queen Moore's life tells us something different because she was able to really navigate so many different periods. Can you talk a little bit about how perhaps her being a woman can really helps us think differently about how to inhabit these different moments and maybe bring them together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we don't have a lot about her is because we kind of like our Black freedom fighters to be young, male, and stuck in time, right? And she's none of those in the sense that, you know, she grows old, that she's in the Harlem Renaissance, she's in the Depression, she survives 2 world wars, McCarthyism, right? The rise and fall of the civil rights movement, all the way till her last major public appearance is at the Million Man March, right? I mean, so it really can't be categorized in that way. And so I think that in part we see that if, and also she wasn't part of like these major organizations that we often know and associate with the Black freedom movement all of the time. And so on the one hand, it shows that basically there are always people working at maybe what we would call the lower frequencies, right? Doing very important work, but it's not, you know, as it were at the tip of the iceberg, but maybe something that looks more underwater. And she's helping to elevate and push the idea of Black nationalism and reparations up for many, many years. But she's also able to sustain that because she's able to kind of move from one political formation to another political formation and be open to that. And a lot of these formations are women-centered, right? Whether that be if she's in the Communist Party, obviously not a women's organization, but she's organizing with the likes of Vicki Garvin and Louise Thompson Patterson, right? And Claudia Jones. Or her own organizations that she develops that are women-centered. So I think it really helps us think through recategorizing these periods and what constitutes a rise and a fall in a movement. For sure, yeah.
So from that, you know, I'm talking about time, now I want to think about space and location. So especially us, again, being here in Harlem, I'd love for you to share more about her life in Harlem, her long life in Harlem, and really what the contours of that looked like, and really the ways that not only Harlem shaped her, but she also shaped Harlem in different ways.
So she's a member of the Great Migration, like a lot of young Black folks in the 1920s. She goes California, she goes to Chicago, but here in Harlem is where she ends up settling, and she comes, you know, on the end of, you know, what you might say is the Harlem Renaissance and the start of the Depression. So the Harlem that was kind of sold to her and the Harlem that she gets are quite different. But it's here that she joins the Communist Party. For those who aren't familiar, you know, the Communist Party may seem like an unlikely place for a Black nationalist, but in the 1930s, they were doing 2 things that really, you know, brought Black people, and particularly Black women, into their orbit. The first is that they were fighting for everyday Black people, whether that was the Scottsboro Boys, right? Or whether that was, you know, the tenant who got evicted because they couldn't pay, they'd come and put your furniture back in. When a Black woman and a white woman left the butcher shop, they would weigh to make sure that the Black woman didn't get cheated, right? And then tell people to boycott the butcher shop. So if you're walking around and trying to find an organization or a place, these people are helping the people that you know. Secondly, they developed what we call the Black Belt thesis, the idea that Black people are connected by our shared heritage, our shared culture, our shared history with oppression, and our shared desire for liberation, and that we have the right to be a nation, and that we have the right to secede from the United States, right? What does that sound like to a young girl that got to Harlem? It sounds like Garveyism, right? And so she gets involved in it because it feels like it has the ideology of Garvey coupled with the everyday work you can do. But it really made its mark on her. She says that this is where she really learned to struggle, right? Where she learned the day in, day out work of organizing, and she developed a class analysis, an understanding of capitalism, an understanding of imperialism that she didn't necessarily get all the time with just Garvey. And she loved it here. She had a thriving kind of organizing community. She had to leave and get out of Dodge for a little while in the middle of the century, as a lot of communists did because of McCarthyism, right? But she did eventually return here and spend, you know, the latter part of her life here, and organizing with, you know, the new generation of Black folks from,
the Malcolm X's to the Black Panther Party, et cetera. And by the time she was in her 80s and 90s, she was heralded as, Harlem's Queen Mother.
Right.
There were moments where they were throwing birthday parties for her, right, in the city. Her home was a place of constant visitors, and the likes of which are the Black greats, right? And so it really was a very kind of symbiotic relationship where she was training folks in learning research in Harlem and organizing Harlem, and by that same time, it was affecting her.
Wonderful. So connected to that,
Yeah.
I remember looking at the cover of the book
Yeah.
and looking at her outfit.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
her jewelry, and I wanted to know so much more about how much her identity and her politics were tied also into her presentation.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So she tells it, she started becoming Queen Mother in the 1950s, right? A group of African students here, she supported them, and they kind of called her, gave her that name as a way of saying thank you for supporting them. But she was formally installed as a Queen Mother in 1972 when she went to Ghana, right? But she used the term and started to kind of inhabit this well before then. And so, you see this transition for her where she is shedding her, what she would call her Negro mind, right? She very much believed in, she had a philosophy called de-Negroization. This is her philosophy, right? And the idea here is that we have been habituated into kind of participating in our own oppression, in our own destruction, by buying too much into white standards, right? So part of her idea of de-Negroizing is letting go of white culture, white political formations like the United States, right? And reconnecting with your African past, right? And that means spiritually, that means politically, that means socially, that means community-wise. And so her kind of coming to become Queen Mother is also coinciding with her trying to work through the ways in which she may have been, I guess, kind of taking in white supremacy more than she thought. And just to give you an example that she gives of how she thinks this affected her own training was that when she was in the Communist Party, she organized to integrate baseball, right, the baseball league. But she realized that she says that in her Negro mind, right, she was working to get like one or two token Black folks into a white system.
Right.
What she should have been doing if she had her right mind was supporting the Negro Leagues, right? Because not only do the Negro Leagues support a bunch of Black players, but also the hotels, the restaurants, right? The Black bus systems, there's a whole, economy, right? That came around each of these Negro Leagues and going from place to place. And so she realized that, even though she thought she was organizing for what she felt to be the right thing, she felt like she was too indoctrinated in that as well. So about mid-century, you really see her shift, perhaps because she feels she's gone too far towards the center, back to really believing in Black community control and supporting Black life in that way. And her shift to Queen Mother also, inhabits that.
I think that's really important because it has us think differently about representation. And so what representation means not only politically, but if you're trying to get access to white power or white capital, it's going to, of course, affect whether you're Negroized or whether you require de-Negroization in order to flourish.
Yeah.
So I actually want to talk about reparations. And so, like you mentioned earlier, there were people, essentially freedom fighters, who first heard about reparations from her. And of course, this is a topic that's come up most recently with California instituting a task force to look into the possibility for reparations in California. Can you talk a bit about her, or at least understanding this genealogy of reparations, but particularly from her standpoint?
Yeah, so I say that, she, and not just me, many people say that she is the mother of the modern reparations movement, right? So what do we mean by that? She was not the first person to come up with the term. She's not the first person, or even the first Black woman to think about how we deserve back pay. Particularly here I'm talking about Callie House,
who organized for payment for formerly enslaved right after the Civil War. But that kind of call dies down. The call for reparations kind of also ebbs and flows as we do better and worse with the American government. Right? And she happens back upon this in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And she says that she is sitting with a group of women. She's bound together a group of black women in New Orleans, Louisiana. These are mostly former Garveyites. And they're sitting around and thinking, like, somebody has to pay for all of this. And when she says the pay, she isn't necessarily talking about payment for labor of slavery, though that is important. She's talking about the 100 years basically from slavery through the 1960s, right? From emancipation to the 1960s, where black folks have endured cultural, economic, physical, sexual, psychological trauma through all the different things that we've endured through white supremacy. And so she thinks about what would it be like for somebody to really try to account for that. And it also is not a coincidence that this is coming up after she survived 2 world wars where she's seen nations pay other nations reparations, right? So the idea is swirling, but she is really the one that kind of nails it to the black experience. Right? So in the late 1950s, early 1960s, she starts going from place to place to place and talking about reparations to folks that will listen. And I think this is one of the things that's really interesting, and it's kind of a situation of kind of letting a million flowers bloom. She had a real clear idea about what reparations should be used for, largely to start a black nation state. But that did not mean that she would not associate or work with other folks who had different ideas about it, right? So some people took that idea and went with it in the black nationalist direction. Some people took it as an idea and went to file a claim with the US government. Some people took it as an idea to build memorials, right? To those who have been lost and perished, to engage individual companies. And we see that now in kind of what you would think of as the reparations movement. There's legislation in state houses, but then there's also a plethora of different forms of memorials to what black people have done. There's also people who are litigating with private companies that have robbed black folks. And there's also, kind of more memorial kind of city level stuff going on. And then you even see folks like a Charles Ogletree, right? Civil rights titan, who said that, it was from her that he learned about reparations as well. So, it really is quite astounding to think about somebody that in the late 1950s and early 1960s, we're talking the ramp up to boycotts. We're talking the ramp up to the March on Washington. And, a lot of people's focus is towards integration at that moment. But she is staying true to her ideas and kind of moving in a different direction that, we kind of all live in the afterlife, as it were, today.
And so along that line, and the ways that she's thinking about compensation for harms done, how does that connect to her Black internationalism in terms of that political theory, but then also the ways that she lived her life?
Yeah, so she very much believed that we could use it to start, like I said, a separate black nation, but she also connects it to anti-imperialist efforts and African decolonization struggles, right? She believes that certainly black Americans deserve reparations, but she takes that call broader, that anybody who was colonized across different African countries is also owed that as part of their rebuilding efforts. And I also remind you, this is a time when the 60s is the height of African decolonization as well. So it's really this moment where you're seeing black people throw off the yoke of their oppressors and then take the helm of black countries, albeit in very different ways, right? But it feels real and it feels palpable. And so I like to remind people of that, because sometimes now these things kind of feel far-fetched, but in the moment you felt like, it was happening. And you needed a theory for how this was gonna play out, right?
So I'm gonna ask you a question, it might seem off the wall, but beyond the fact that when you were conducting interviews and doing work on your other book, you came across this woman who you couldn't find much on. Once you did do the work, the many years of work and such hard work, what made you know, I guess, that her story needed to be out here? And especially now. What about her life? What about her work? She's shown not only an amazing ideology in terms of helping us think about Blackness, think about identity in a variety of contexts, think about pride and what we deserve, think about community. But was there a moment or was there a way that you knew that this was such an important story to bring forward?
That's a really good question. I don't know if there was one moment, but kind of a bunch of little moments come together. And maybe I'll offer two that really stick out in my head. One is going back to this organization that I said she was starting in the late 1950s called the Universal Association of Ethiopian Women. So you see she's playing on Garveyism because she wants to attract these Garveyites, right? And like this little group, and we're talking like a band of 10 middle-aged black women in the South, right? By day, they are driving to Angola, where they are interviewing black men on death row, usually on death row for raping white women, right? Allegedly, obviously not true. Then going back to New Orleans and basically finding evidence that exonerates them and sometimes gets them stays of execution mere days to hours before they're set to die. Like that's Tuesday for them, right? And then they're also organizing when black women get kicked off the welfare rolls as part of similar things that happen today, creating kind of statutes that deny you your aid because of how your home is situated. And then, if that were not enough, they're also drafting this pamphlet that they're circulating that is a Declaration of Independence for a Black Republic, right? To separate and succeed from the United States. So I was like, who is this woman who is, that is, you know, by day literally saving lives, you know, by night, and the genius of her was that, you know, while she's handing out food or while she's talking about these men on death row, she'll just start to throw in, so you ever wonder why it's only black men on death row? Ever wonder why the black women are the only ones that can't eat, right? So she starts to kind of politicize and help people gain a critique of the American nation state while just doing the work, right? So I thought it was really great. And then, so that was just like, any group, any woman that is leading that is pretty astounding, and I had to know more. And then the other is, so as I mentioned, there's no real archive, nothing where she's from, but and her family, her son and his children don't have very much either. But one thing that her son has is this old 45 record of her singing. And just like, she's not a good poet. Cannot carry a tune to save her life, right? So I want you to imagine, so he lives in Philadelphia, so it's me, he has 3 daughters, 1 granddaughter is also named Audley, and me, and he has a way to play this 45. So we put it on, and like first come the drums, then come like it's, you know, it's giving Black power, right? And then she does this rendition of My Country 'Tis of Thee, but she's completely changed the words, so it's basically like this Black nationalist anthem. And then I kid you not, at the very end she goes da 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 da, and like all 3 of us are like laughing so hard we're sobbing because it's just like, what is happening, right? So, but I loved that because I was like, find me somebody that is doing all of this, right? But at the same time has this kind of like funness and joie de vivre that like is also just absolutely deeply unserious, right? Deeply unserious. That connection. And so, yeah, and I was like, I need to write about somebody that can hold these things together because I think a big issue we have is that, you know, we put these people in this pantheon and they're not real people, right? And so, you know, it's important to tell the story of someone who persisted, but also, you know, wrote bad poetry and liked to sing songs and had a sweet tooth and, you know, navigated some of the same challenges with their family and with their friends that we all do, because then it becomes a usable history, right? One where you don't have to be perfect and have all the answers and be ready to die, you know, every second for you to be about the life, right?
There's something really remarkable about how approachable she seemed in the work and as a person as well. And I know that you didn't get an opportunity to talk to her, but it still feels as though your connection to her was really strong based on the work that you were doing, the ephemera that you were collecting, talking to her family. So I'm wondering if you can talk about, and specifically talk to the audience, being in the Schomburg, how important it really could be to talk to family members, or at least learn so much more about people who may not show up in box number 3, right? How to know when there's an opportunity to kind of think about the everyday work that folks are doing to really advance the people, advance community, advance their children, right? That still ends up being a really significant, important.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it was really important. I knew that I would not tell this story without forming a relationship with her family, right? I think, anytime you wade into telling somebody else's family's history, it can be complicated. And, there's different dynamics there. We definitely held Black women freedom fighters and Black men freedom fighters to very different standards for family and childcare, right? And anybody knows that if you're in the streets organizing, you can only do so much, right? And so there's difficulties in navigating that, and there's respect with navigating that. I'll also add that there's another piece here in that she had a massive FBI file, right, which we can talk about later as well. So there's also a bunch of things that you may learn about somebody's private life. And, there's decisions about whether and what you should share in that. And I think a relationship with her community is important for that too, versus just, taking the state's word for it or something like that, right? But beyond that, I mean, my goodness, it was such a joy to talk to so many different people, some of whom I see in the audience, about her, because everybody had a recollection. Everybody met her in a different moment and in a different way. And it was amazing to hear from people that, just passed through her life in the sense of they just saw her at a meeting and just remembered her, to those that lived in her home, right? To those who did security for her, to those who saw her in her final moments before she died, right? And I think that if you really want to have the texture of a person, right? Not just what they did, but how they were, how they, like I said, she just loved sweets, right? She was constantly eating sweets, there's stuff like that you remind you, she's also somebody's grandma, right? Or, also there's really heartbreaking moments. She has 3 granddaughters, like I said, the oldest of which is Audley, and she took these granddaughters on her trips to Jamaica and to Africa. And so it was really interesting to see them talk about their grandmother and have the realization who their grandmother was. But also the moments when she broke their heart, right? When she did things or said things that just didn't jive with what they were told and what their image was, right? And I think, and she broke my heart sometimes, writing this too. I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to do this.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's also a really important part of understanding our freedom fighters as well. Yeah.
How nuanced they are, and they're actually human
They're
beings,
human,
right?
yeah, and they'll break your heart.
Well, you brought up the FBI files, so I feel like I can ask you about that. So
yeah.
if you think about especially J. Edgar Hoover, and also prior to that with McCarthyism and the HUAC committee, can you talk more about her file and the depth and breadth of her FBI file?
Yeah, I mean, so the feds were following her well before the start of COINTELPRO, which started in the 1950s, in the 1920s, when she started getting associated with the Communist Party, right? And they followed her into the 1970s on. So, I mean, you're talking, a half a century of federal surveillance. But and what is the really interesting kind of mind-turning thing here is that for her and some of the other Black radical women that I study, this is sometimes the most complete accounting we have of their life. And why do I say that? That's because for day in and day out, for months, years, there were agents following and telling every person she came in contact with, every phone call she had, every meeting she went to. Sometimes they even create a scrapbook for you in the sense that they cut out the newspaper articles of the events and put them in the FBI file, right? So in some ways, it kind of becomes the archive and sometimes the archive that we have, right? So in some ways you would never know some of the stuff about her without it, but the other times that's insanely problematic and to do that. And so it presents quite a few challenges. It also presents some real ethical challenges, right? What is it like to build a life based on stuff from the state? And like I said, when do you learn something that maybe the state knew because of their surveillance that you don't? And then sometimes what do you just not say because these women never had any privacy for years. So maybe we owe them some privacy in the scholarship, and that's okay too, right?
And so not necessarily in the FBI file, but what did you find out about her that was surprising to you, given all these contours? It sounds as though you probably couldn't be surprised.
Every day was a new twist and turn with her.
I really had to kind of rethink what I was looking for, in the sense that she was very flexible in terms of who she would work with, far more flexible than I thought. So there'd be moments where, particularly, say, in the middle of World War II, it ain't a good idea to be a communist, and it ain't a good idea to be saying that you're going to start a separate black nation when we're in the middle of, patriotic fervor, right? But you still believe these things. So what do you do? And so how do you keep organizing and keep moving and keep staying afloat in the midst of that? So I saw her join organizations that I didn't think that she would join, like, kind of like the women's clubs and things like that. But I also saw her kind of trying to get in there and kind of do her own thing with, like, making sure they had community control and make sure they were practicing self-determination, even if they were in that space. So it was surprising to see some of the kind of strange bedfellows sometimes that she worked with, which I would think that. But it was also a reminder that, like, people form coalitions sometime. Like, you don't have to have the exact same ideological outlook. Sometimes there's an event, a moment, a political cause that can bring people together. You can work together, and then coalitions don't last forever.
Sure.
Right? They disperse, and that's okay. People still remain in community, even if they're not organizing around that exact thing. So she taught me to really just think more broadly about that, and also, like, how can one practice one's values in all kinds of different settings, right?
And there's a lot of risk in that too, I'd imagine, and especially with the ways that you were collecting and having to use the state's records, but then also records from her family, and then recognizing that there was a method to how she was thinking and trying to operate. I want to go back to her insistence on Garveyism and the importance of it in her life. And from what you were able to gather and conversations you were able to have, what was it that drew her so strongly to Garveyism that carried her through her life?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, people become politicized in their own time. I think we can't discount what it was like to be that young black girl and hear this, right? So that's what got her in. But what has stayed is that, I mean, I think that she felt like his analysis of Pan-Africanism and his understanding of the connectivity of the black diaspora was one that was enduring. She moved away from his kind of back to Africa idea to having a black nation here on U.S. soil. But nonetheless, like, I think it taught her a level of racial pride that she felt like no other place could she get that and understand that. And you get it, right? I mean, you've heard about these parades that used to be down, these streets. You heard about the Liberty Hall, where people used to come and hear lectures about what was happening in the world. I mean, it really taught her that she could and should be a citizen of the world, and that she had the ability to interpret that. One of the things she was always balancing is that because she didn't have what she deemed kind of a formal education, she did have insecurities about that, right? And I think Garveyism was a place where you could go and you could become a learned person about world issues and cultural issues without having, quote unquote, formal schooling. And I think that instilled a sense of pride and self-confidence in her. But I mean, she was a Garveyite all of her life, right?
Exactly.
All of her life, yeah.
And I'm curious about that in a lot of ways, because if we imagine Marcus Garvey as a person, of course, there's complexity and especially around gender politics and understanding the role of the black woman in Garveyism. And so in a lot of ways that has us think more about what it means to follow Garvey as a charismatic leader versus Garveyism as, again, an ideology or a way of operating ontologically as well. So I'm curious, just from that standpoint, given the fact that she did support and really resurrected Garveyism in real ways, what would you say is the Queen Moorism? What are the things that we should gather as it relates to these combined ways of understanding Black nationalism, understanding a kind of radical communitarianism, infusing pieces of communism, right? Because her legacy is vast.
His legacy is vast,
We can't just point to one area, one way of thinking. What can we walk away with to understand what Queen Moorism might be?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll say for that. So I mean, maybe I'll talk about maybe what I think would be like its core tenets in a way. So certainly reparations, right? I think that without a shadow of a doubt, she felt that reparations was, again, not just a payment owed to us, but really a conduit, right? It was a conduit to bring Black people together to talk about their shared past. It was a conduit to reconnect with Africa and thinking about what was stolen and taken from us as a form of repair, right? You know, a way to kind of address the trauma of the Middle Passage. And also it was, you know, seed money for nation building. So, you know, it was a very kind of wide-ranging understanding of reparations or repayment or repair. I would also say that her denegroizing is key, right? And they're related to her,
Absolutely.
right? So once you kind of disabuse yourself of certain understandings of white supremacy in America and citizenship and everything, then you're primed to understand why America owes you reparations, right? And then you're primed to understand then why trying to basically engage in what I think she felt was a failed project of America is not useful and you need to move in this way, right? So it was kind of this thing of once you start to wake up from the stupor that you're in, then it's only natural that you understand that you've been wronged, and then you think about how to make that right, and then what real freedom looks like to you on the other side of that. So I think she saw that very much as like a continuum in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those two.
Yeah,
were
I
the-
mean, that was, yeah,
No,
that
I think
was sliding on the question.
No,
but-
I think it's a real way to think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
how we can see these
Yeah.
complex figures,
Yeah.
these people who are human,
Yeah.
but then recognize what they're able to offer us
Yeah.
outside of who
Outside
they
of-
were
yeah.
as individuals.
And I would just also say just staying the course, right? I mean, like, what a life of just, you know, she had her ideas and she stuck to it, and sometimes they were popular.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were very unpopular.
Yeah.
Then they came back in fashion again.
Yeah.
Then they were out. I think now we might say maybe she was on to a few things again, right? And so, you know, but that didn't change her, right? She understood, she put her compass in a way and she moved that way with purpose. And I think that's a valuable lesson no matter what too, right?
Reading this book, it became so clear to me that something that I often think about is how time, especially for Black folks, is not linear. And so we have to recognize that there are these different cycles that are moving constantly. And so there was something I was also, in terms of thinking about Black feminist thought, let's say, where we often think about Black feminism or name it in a way in the middle of the 20th century, though we recognize there were plenty of Black women who were very instrumental in thinking about equality or thinking about women's labor and these elements. And so could you speak a bit more about how we might understand Queen Moore's feminism, Black feminism, if at all?
My girls, gender politics were complicated. You know, here's the thing. You know, she would never have considered herself a feminist. She did not promote anything that I think we would label as feminism, even post hoc. It was very much in her nationalist understanding that the man was the head of the Black nation, and we should be following, you know, these Black men leading these Black nations, right? To the point sometimes of, you know, forgoing her values in their kind of adoration of Black male leaders, particularly in Africa. I'll save that for you reading the book. Things go left. But that was not at all how she lived her life. Right? She was having partnerships that when they didn't work out because they didn't jive with her politics, she left that man alone, right? She was clearly making organizations in which she was leading or basically kind of shadow leading, right? She was forming these women-centered organizations. There was at no point that she did not think that she herself or other Black women were very capable leaders, right? And not just leaders, also intellectuals, right? That have theories and analyses that needed to be imparted on younger folks, right? So, you know, one way to look at that is that she grew up in a different time, you know, coming of age and turn of the century. She kind of got into a set of gender politics that was hard to get out of. The other thought is that it was useful for her to traffic in that, right? As long as she was promoting this, she wasn't going to be seen as a threat. Right? And that allowed her to still have seats at the table and be in rooms with powerful Black men because she was just being the queen mother and the advisor, not somebody that was going to usurp that power, even though that wasn't the case, right? So it was complicated, but the women who I talked to that were young organizers that were mentored by her, knew her, very much chafed against her gender politics. They found them to be very regressive in comparison to her other politics.
Well, I think this brings up something that's important also in thinking about biography as a particular methodology to understanding, or at least to tell stories. And something that's really important to Black studies is understanding the Black experience and how people actually lived. And so to complicate that picture, like you said, if you paid attention to how she lived, what she did, it actually is aligned with a sense, a kind of Black womanism that shows that she can essentially do anything, which she did, right? Despite the fact that what she actually said might have been counter to how she lived.
Yeah.
And so that still is instructive. That helps us understand not only the complication of human beings, but also ways that we can still do the work by just living our lives and influencing people in ways that we need to.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, you know, I want to go back to some of the travel that she did, especially to the continent and also to the Caribbean. How do you think this influenced, how do you think this influenced the work she was doing in Harlem in particular? So we think about Harlem also being this bastion of so many different cultures and communities. Do you think that that had something to do, her travel had so much to do with the impact that she was having specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, because she was not well off, I mean, she lived mostly with the support of others in her community, right? I mean, organizing does not pay the bills. She did not really get to travel until she was much older and much later in life. But in a short period of time, she went a lot of places in the in the 70s and 80s. So also that means she's in her 70s and 80s too, right? When she's doing this. So she goes to Jamaica, which is very exciting for her because it is the birthplace of Marcus Garvey. She goes to London, which was surprising, right? And develops a Black history and Black group organizing there, so much so that there's an archive that still exists to this day that was created based on her visits there in the 80s. And then she also goes and visits different African countries. She goes to Ghana, she goes to Tanzania, she goes to Nigeria, she goes to Uganda, right? And there she is feted as a queen mother of the movement, right? And part of that is because she is known by this point. Like I said, she's an elder statesman in that way. But also because, you know, those who are decolonizing and looking to forge relationships across the diaspora need Black American support. And she is seen as somebody who has the ear of Black America, particularly here in Harlem, right? And so you start to see this exchange as she's older where, you know, she goes abroad and meets dignitaries and diplomats, and then when they come here to go to the UN or to come to Harlem, right? Nelson Mandela, another example, right? You know, she is the person or one of the people that they meet as kind of a representative of Black America. So I think that this, you know, for better or worse, I think she had a fairly essentialized view of Africa at first, you know, one where it was this great Black continent, but going to all these different places obviously taught her a lot about the diversity and culture from country to country.
That's right.
And also about, you know, it was real sobering in terms sometimes like what happens when the Black nationalist dream comes true, but it's also not working, right? So I think that helped her also fine-tune her understanding of like what she wanted for Black people here.
And especially here. Okay, I'm low on time, but I have a couple more questions. So, you know, oftentimes when we read about amazing political leaders and community leaders, there's this point at which they become radicalized, right? So if we think about how we hear stories about Martin Luther King Jr., or we hear stories about Malcolm X, or W.B. Du Bois, where towards the end of their lives, they start to shift their orientation and change. But this book, learning about Audley Moore, was a very different story. And so I'm curious what that looks like. We seem to understand when the men do it as growth, right? Or again, they become radicalized. She remained consistent and really kind of grew. It was like concentric circles. Like she just kept growing within this space. So can you talk a little bit about that process? And really, were you surprised when you saw over her life, she maintained consistency in terms of her political worldview?
Well, what's interesting is that, you know, I kind of, because I was talking to people who knew her, you know, when I first encountered her in the 60s and 70s, I encountered her as this kind of fully realized person. So what was remarkable was going so far back, right? And realizing that she had kind of maintained these politics for so long. But one of the things that I really also appreciate about her is that, like, she read a lot. She taught herself a lot. She also knew what she didn't know, right? And she took in new information and she rethought things, you know? She was a constant student and also encouraging other people to be a constant student of things. And I think that's also how you sustain a practice for that long, right? Yes, she was a Garveyite, yes, she was a Black nationalist, but how that manifested, or even reparations, right? How she thought about that, she was okay with her thinking evolving, right? As we all should be. And I think one of our struggles perhaps nowadays is, you know, no one wants to admit that they took a position and then it may not be the best or right position, or they have new ideas or new data, right? And so therefore you need a new analysis. So I think that is probably what helped sustain it for so long. And one of the things that I really noticed that, and really done by her, like I said, not a lot of formal training, more just, I'm gonna keep reading, I'm gonna keep understanding.
And so in a lot of ways it tells us how institutions can indoctrinate us in particular ways, but the forms of self-taught or at least this knowledge, this education that we build through experience, but also through the words of others, those we respect, and consistency, honestly, to help grow. So I'm wondering if you can share with the audience maybe 2 or 3 things that you do want them to walk away with as it relates to Queen Mother. What are the things that you think are really important for them, not to just go by the book, because, you know, it's the holiday time.
It's a great gift.
You can read, sit by the fire.
Got a little downtime.
Right? But not just to get the book, but generally speaking, let's say they have the book, let's say they've read it. What do you want them to walk away with about her?
I want to hope people see by looking at somebody like her, how many networks of Black women are just working day to day on the ground. Whether that be, you know, maybe we can talk a little bit more about this in Q&A, but she was the oldest of 3 sisters, and they moved together all of their lives also in these radical organizations. You know, this also could have been a book of the 3 of them moving through the 20th century together. And so I think that we talk about like sisterhood in the broadest sense, but this was like a sisterhood in a sisterhood, right? And so, and she was forming these relationships with all kinds of women, some that are really well known, like a Mary McLeod Bethune, a Claudia Jones, some that, you know, only some people in the audience, like Adara Abubakari, people would know, right? So I really want to see the patchwork of Black women. I want people to see how seriously we should take Black women as intellectuals, right? I think that she is one of the key architects of Black radicalism in the 20th century. She is somebody who is not only studying who we consider the greats, if not actually speaking with them, right? But also creating her own analyses and her own understandings of the world that have continually proved productive for us. So I think that's really important, right?
No, absolutely. And I just to add to that, and it's clear, she is a builder. She is an architect. She's someone who develops as well. And we think about that as it relates to actual physical materials, but also in terms, like you said, as an intellectual and understanding Black women as intellectuals. Not just in what books we read, but also in how we live our lives. And so understanding Queen Mother is instructive for us to continue to move along and do this work. So I want to thank everyone for coming, but I do want to encourage everyone as well to buy this book. And I am a professor, but I don't love to read all the time. And it really was an easy read in that the story really takes off. Like you can actually imagine her. I could see her. My family's from Louisiana. And so I was just imagining some of the places where she could have been, where my great-grandmother might have run into her, and these elements that were so important. So if we could thank Professor Farmer for being here. And we do have some time for questions. I know you have some.
I think you have to get a microphone.
Do we have a mic?
Oh,
the mics are up here in the back of the room.
Oh, there's 2.
There's 2.
In the spirit of my ancestor, Queen Mother Audley Moore, I had the honor and the privilege of her, through Thelma Moore, asking me to work with her. I had the opportunity, after being a Roman Catholic nun for 10 years. And Queen Mother is correct, had a fourth grade education. But she was a wise woman who understood the terrain of us as a people. And I remembered in that 20 years of being at her side, especially from the United Nations, and one word she asked me to foster for her, and the word is reparations. Honey, go get your money. Children, they owe you. They owe you for the greatest crime ever committed against you. And I agree that I will do that at the United Nations, which I've been there for 56 years as a humanitarian. But to say to everyone in the room, she wants to hear from all of us of inclusion of those she had met throughout the Harlem community that she loved and cherished. But she had the opportunity of going to Jamaica to look for only one man, and that was the Honorable Marcus Masai Garvey. She loved him. And the Black Star Line
Yes.
of going to Africa with him and being a part of buying or investing in stocks to do so. If you ever spend any time with her, just a moment in time, she would say to us, what time of the day it is. And I'm going to leave it what time of the day it is in the life and the work and the celebration of our ancestor, Queen Mother Audley Moore. I am Queen Mother Blakely. And thank you for the work that you have presented tonight to all of us. I thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First, I'd like to thank you for the immense work that went into this particular book and, of course, the conversation this evening. Secondly, I would like to invite you to come on my WBAI radio program sometime in the near future, Education at the Crossroads. There's also another WBAI colleague who wants you on as well. Thirdly, I want to emphasize the importance of the East organization in Queen Mother Moore's later life. And I'm going to give two examples from the book itself.
Yeah.
When I first got the book, I looked through the pictures. There's a picture of Queen Mother Moore when she was installed in Ghana. She's in Kenti, and she's got her sandals. There's someone sitting next to her. That is Job Mashariki, who is G2 Wayusi's brother, who actually traveled with Queen Mother Moore in Guinea and Ghana on that particular trip.
Yes.
Okay? It was funded by the East, very clearly, and it was one of many examples of our interaction with Queen Mother Moore. The second is Queen Mother Moore went to the All African Women's Conference in Tanzania.
Yes.
She was accompanied by Alberta Hill, who at the time I happened to be married to.
Oh, okay.
Both Job and Alberta are still alive, and they would have been great, great sources in regards to what you've been doing. The other thing, of course, is, as I said, in her later life, we all have so many different stories. I can tell you about Queen Mother Moore and Mother Langley inviting me to breakfast on Stebbins Avenue, and so many other particular stories that we at the East have. So for further reference as we move along, I think it's an important reference point.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Ashley, do you want to say anything more about her time with the East?
The East was central to her life, and the life is so long that you can't go into everything, but it was an absolutely quintessential part of her organizing, in particular because it was a space where it felt like some of her ideas about Black nationhood were coming into being, right? It was little Africa in that little part of the city. And the different members of the East accompanied her on multiple trips, actually, and helped support her life there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, good evening. I'd like to introduce myself, first of all, to you, Dr. Farmer. My name is Anthony Hallidan. I am Queen Mother Moore is my great aunt.
Yes. Oh, yes. I heard you were coming. Nice to see you.
Yeah, my cousin tell you.
Could you lean into the mic a little bit more?
And I just want to thank you for, I just want to thank you also for doing this work and bringing this, keeping her memory alive. And because there were so many times when my sons were growing up and they had to do history reports or some kind of reports in school, and I would tell them, I said, listen, do it on, somebody you're related to. Do it on Audley, which is what I called her. Or do it on Audley. And we could never find complete information. And to this day, I have my two oldest sons with me now. And to this day, there's a lot of incomplete knowledge of who she was and what she represented, not only for me, but for them too. And I'm just glad to see everybody in here keeping her memory alive, and that this work I can give to my sons and let them read, as well as tell them what I know and my memories of Aunt Audley, as well as Queen Mother Moore. So again, I want to thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. Hello.
How you doing, Doc?
Good. How are you?
I had occasion to speak with the Dr. Farmer on several occasions when she was working on the book. And now it has finally come to pass. I'm reading it now, and my assessment of it is that while it exemplifies the very best of what the historical profession has produced in terms of research technique, her particular composition is a unique mixture of erudition and poetry that I say really ascends to the level of some sort of rare intellectual alchemy, that it surpasses even the best scholarship. Queen Mother Moore is somebody who was very dear to me. I met her on my 20th birthday. She heard me on the radio after I'd spent a year in here, an entire year in here, studying African history. I'd come out of the Strategic Air Command. I'd been on a nuclear strike base whose mission was the nuclear destruction of the Soviet Union. So I had a lot of time on my hands. I started by reading J. Rogers. And Rogers kept, in all of his footnotes, he kept mentioning this place, the Schomburg Collection, which was next door there. So when I got out, all I wanted to do was come to the Schomburg Collection and first of all see if these footnotes he had checked out, if what he was saying was really real. So that's what I did. And I started calling this radio. I lived in Philadelphia. I used to come up here and stay with my uncle and just spend days in here with Mr. Ernest Kaiser and what have you. And so I got to the point where I knew quite a lot about this. So I started calling into this radio show. On the night of my 20th birthday, they invited me to appear on the show. And that's when I met Queen Mother. She was listening. And after it was a 3-hour show, I did a lecture for an hour called Was Ancient Egypt an African Civilization? For an hour. And then I took 2 hours of questions. After the second hour, she called. And she knew the producer of the program, who, if you read Manning Marable's book on Malcolm, he keeps talking about Malcolm being on the Joe Rainey show. This is the show talking about it. The name of it was really The Listening Post in Philadelphia. I never heard anybody talk like her. She said, I've been sitting here listening for 2 hours, and I keep thinking that yesterday he was a kid, he was 19 years old. Do you think it's an accident that he happens to come along now when our people are rising up all over the world? I mean, I never heard anything like it. And she invited me to come visit her. And when I went to visit her, I had on my military fatigues, and I had a beard like Castro, and Castro was a hero. I didn't even know what the Cuban Revolution was about. All I know is that the white folks in Florida, where I came from, were scared to death of it. So that was good enough for me, right? So I got on my fatigues and my beard. And so she said to me, she said, she had a library in her house. She said, well, young man, you've obviously done a lot of study, but what do you intend to do with your life? I said, I'm ready to die for my people. And usually when you say that, people would get, very impressed. Queen Mother looked at me, she sucked her teeth, she said, so you're ready to die? She said, well, if you just want to die, that's easy because the white man will kill you. She said, especially black men like you. And then she asked me a question that changed my life. She said, let me ask you this. Don't you think anything worth dying for is much more worth living for? And she said, so why are you talking about dying? Let's talk about how we're going to live and how we're going to win. From her, I went on to become one of the founders of Black Studies at UMass Amherst. Became one of the founders of the Revolutionary Action Movement. Nobody was as important a teacher in my life as she was. She taught me, when I'm sitting and listening to Dr. Farmer talk about her involvement with different organizations, she taught me about alliances. Lessons that people need to learn right now, these idiots, who chose not to vote and help elect Trump. They needed to hear what she had to say about alliances. So it's fair to say I'm 83 years old now, and I met her 63 years ago. And she shaped my life unlike anybody else, and I met some of the smartest people in the world. But this woman with a third-grade education, nobody had more of an influence on what I became than her. And Dr. Farmer, what she's done is given us her life in a cogent text that we can read. She saved her from obscurity. So this is more than, like I said, a work of scholarship. This is, she has enriched the canon. Now, I think women historians have enriched historical writing, period. I'm on record saying that on C-SPAN.
We appreciate this reflection that you're giving us and sort of affirming the many things that you all have been saying about Black women's intellectualism and being able to champion it, and also giving us this incredible story about Queen Mother Moore. I am going to ask us to move to 2 more questions, but I really do appreciate your reflections. It was helpful in this conversation. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Dr. Farmer. Thank you for your contribution to Queen Mother Moore. There's 2 pictures of Malcolm X on that poster in back of her. I would like to know, what did she think about the assassination of Malcolm X, and how did she view Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, since they claim to be the premier Black nationalist organization in America?
Ooh, you're gonna get me in trouble. She was devastated by Malcolm's assassination. In fact, one of the things in the book is a poem that she wrote in reaction to it. It broke her heart because she says that she first heard about saw Malcolm in Harlem at a protest, and she was captivated, the likes of which she hadn't seen since Garvey, right? And there is all this correspondence actually held here between kind of her and old nationalist communists that are so excited about him and what he can represent. But they do feel that he is limited by the Nation of Islam, right? And Elijah Muhammad's mandates for staying out of things. And so the way she tells it is that when he would stop by, say her house in Philadelphia, she would try to reason with him. She'd try to talk to him about reparations. She'd try to say that you need to have a more Pan-African, an African-focused understanding to your liberation strategy that he wasn't able to kind of break free from until he left the Nation of Islam. So she felt like it was this great moment when he was going to create the OAAU and begin to really, fulfill his promise politically and organizationally. So she was very sad. But I will say that, she tried to carry on his legacy from holding, events to celebrate or commemorate his death in the early years. Like, we talk a lot about him now, but in those early years, it was a small group tending to the fire, right? And she was one of those. She also worked with his Saturday school, the Liberation School, even after he died. So she felt trying much to keep his legacy alive.
This will be our last question.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Good evening. It's more or less not a question.
Could you lean into the mic, please, or bring the mic to you?
Hi, good evening. Hi. My name is Candace. It's not so much as a question, but it's more or less of a presentation. So Queen Mother Blakely here, she asked that I shared an artifact that belonged to Queen Mother Moore that she wore every day until she could no longer wear it.
Wow.
Okay, at the end of the program, we will share that with Dr. Farmer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, with that said, thank you all for such thoughtful questions, as well as sharing your reflections of Queen Mother Moore. I feel like, as you said, she is someone who grew old, which is incredible, but also then lived not only in scholarship, not only in the minds of people who met her, but in popular culture. Like, when hip hop is coming up, her name is coming up a great deal. And so I know for a lot of people in my own generation, that is sort of how she has like this next life, right, while living in the 90s. And so I just really appreciate this scholarship has been done, and that it is one more story that we get to tell during our centennial. That is really important, so that when you look at these faces, or you read about, frankly, when you read about only Marcus Garvey, that you're thinking about these other people who are coming along and taking those kinds of ideas and moving them forward. So I love that question about, like, what is the Queen Mother theology or theory as a running story, and so I appreciate that. And so when you're looking at anything that we have here in the Schomburg Center, I hope it jogs some additional curiosity that would make you go into any of our research libraries, research divisions. All you need is your library card in order to access any of these collections, from James Baldwin to anything that we have on Queen Mother Moore to many other figures, to our UNIA collections as well. So with that said, please thank Dr. Farmer and Dr. Summers. Again, the books are available in our Schomburg shop, and Dr. Farmer will be signing them outside in the lobby. We appreciate you all so much and look forward to seeing you all again at one of the 2 events before the end of the year. If not, have an incredible holiday and a very safe new year. Have a good evening.